EA have been in a rough spot. Anthem was quite the flop, Battlefield 5 underperformed significantly, Apex Legends seemed to be the company's saving grace, but it experienced seemingly massive player falloff after its launch month, with their first season widely being seen as a disappointment. So can EA turn it around? Well, they've pretty much announced their plan, and that's what we're going to be talking about today. Hey everyone, and welcome back to another industry report. It's the first of our proper E3 video, so be sure to headbutt that subscribe button and check out the 4 videos we just released. And with that, let's get into the breakdown. First up, we've got Star Wars. So we've finally seen some gameplay, and it's a kind of tricky one to break down because it does appear to be a rather formulaic game. You've got melee combat, third person, it's an action game, it's got some magic. A lot of that's, well, pretty common, but in fairness, you can look at a lot of other games like, say, Uncharted 4, and you could see its main gameplay loop as being pretty simple and formulaic. Sure, it's not a stunning game in concept, but it's the execution that can make or break it. Just like how, say, with Uncharted or The Last of Us, they totally rely on Naughty Dog's quality, execution, and storytelling rather than having the most groundbreaking and innovative gameplay. But that said, the gameplay that they did show, well, that could actually be going somewhere. So, on a basic level, we saw them dealing with a few varieties of basic troopers. You had ranged guys with blasters, melee rushers. They were both very, very easily dispatched, like one-hit kills. The more simplistic combat sections of their demo honestly seemed pretty boring to me, but things did pick up once the melee Inquisitor character got involved. Now, that involved seemingly a bunch of timed parries and dodges. There seemed to be a sort of posture system that was pretty noticeable in breaking the enemy's composure, and it seemed like quite a good fight. They then mixed in that Inquisitor-type enemy with the basic troopers that I mentioned earlier in another combat arena, and that did lead to something that seemed to layer up quite nicely, with the management requirements of each enemy type being seemingly multiplicative in nature rather than being additive. Essentially, the enemies combining together more like how they would in Doom rather than, say, in Anthem, where in Doom, every different combination of enemies really does change how a fight feels. Moving on, though, there were flame troopers that they showed off. They seemed like they would add in a lot more depth to a larger engagement. They also had some native spider creatures, which is pretty cool, as well as a tease of an enemy heavy trooper and an ATST. The combat itself, it seemed pretty fluid and refined, seemingly a bit more on the slow and weighty side, which absolutely is a good thing, in my view. Essentially, it just seems like there's the core of a pretty solid combat system here, though I'm sure that it won't shine in normal difficulty. This looks like a game that really does need to be played on hard or very hard. After all, I think being a powerful glass cannon that survives purely on skill, I think that's far closer to the Jedi fantasy, at least in my view. Past combat, well, the rest did seem kind of formulaic. The main character, it just, it didn't grab me during the original reveal, and nothing in this trailer has really changed that at all. The game also does look to be highly linear in its layout, but we will just have to see how that changes in future levels. Now, if you take another highly linear game, Uncharted 4, you could say that it would have the same problems, but it did manage to balance it out with some sections that at least gave you the illusion of freedom. And then it was also interesting seeing some Souls inspirations. They've essentially said that the game's health system is taking a nod from the Souls series, so you don't have regenerating health, instead you have med kits on your droid companion. Those kits only regenerate at save points, almost like bonfires. So that's actually something that I'm really glad to see. I think that could really add to the sense of accomplishment of getting through a gameplay section, especially on higher difficulties, which probably will be key in having the gameplay feel match the character arc that I imagine they're going to be going with. And then speaking of game inspirations, they actually, you know what, here's just a quote from the Game Informer preview. When the saber is stealthed, Respawn's vision for the adventure has classic gaming roots and is inspired heavily by the Metroid series, pushing players to freely explore worlds and come back to them later with new powers that can be used to reach different areas. Never once do players see a waypoint in the screen telling them where their next objective is. Respawn doesn't want to hold your hand and instead hopes you plot your own path through dangerous worlds that are teeming with just as much hostile wildlife as heavily armed Imperial forces. Now, from what I saw of the demo, there are elements there that I'm highly suspicious of, but if the game can deliver on what Game Informer's preview is hyping up, yeah, I certainly would be happy. So where does this leave us? Well, look, we've not seen that much of this game, have we? This really did look like it was just an earlier level. And for me, that means that they will have every chance to win me over on, say, their main character in the actual story. As I said at the beginning of this video, this is the type of game that purely on concept will not look earth-shattering. It's a pretty safe bet, but it's the type of game that massively relies on its execution. Now, if anyone is to do that, I'd say it is Respawn. Back in the original Infinity Ward days, you know, that's many of the people who made Call of Duty 4. And that was a shockingly competent game that provided a story that was far from surface level. Then look at Titanfall 2. Again, a campaign that was better than it had any right to be, both in terms of its character work, but also its gameplay mechanics. Ultimately, Respawn are a hell of a studio, and I trust them to pull this one off. Next, and still with Respawn Entertainment, seemingly the stars of EA, we've got Apex Legends. So this game has had a pretty rocky time as of late, with its Twitch viewership utterly tanking from its seemingly rather propped up high of the initial launch month, with revenue also seemingly falling a lot month after month. Season 1 really did not do that much for the game. It had a battle pass that was below par, and just it didn't really shake the game up. It didn't give people that many new reasons to play. Thankfully though, it seems like Respawn are keenly aware of their shortcomings, and they basically said on stage that Season 1 did not go as well as they had hoped. So, what are they going to do to save this game and to get it back up to speed? Well, it starts with the legendary Hunt event. This is going to run until June 18th, and it will be adding the Apex Elite Queue, which is just a new game feature for Apex Legends. So if you get a top 5 finish, you'll be able to join an Elite Queue, which will only have other people that have got top 5 finishes, and while in that queue, you'll be able to complete Elite challenges, and that can get you an epic skin for Bloodhound, a legendary skin for Wraith, and a legendary skin for the R301 Assault Rifle. Now, getting a top 5 finish is also going to give you a full Battle Pass level, and they're also doing this on a double XP weekend that is, well, this weekend. Overall, it seems like a pretty decent shot in the arm for the game right now, but of course what matters is Season 2, and what Respawn have really talked about with Season 2 pretty much seems to be exactly what they need to do to get this game in a better state. So, we're going to start off with Wattson, who is a new legend, a new character for the game. They were announced along with a short lore video similar to what you would see with Blizzard's Overwatch. Seemingly they want to build out the Frontiers lore, and, well, we'll just have to see where that goes. Now, as for Wattson, well, she is designed to be a powerful defensive pick who has a lot of gameplay aspects that will counter the current meta. She can place up to 12 electric fence posts. Now, these will let allies through, but not enemies, and that means you can seal off flanking routes and do all sorts of dastardly things, and it very much will reward players who have a very good understanding of the map. Then her ult will regen the shields of nearby allies, as well as destroy throwable items that go near it from enemies, and it will also, based on proximity, speed up the recharge of her pylons, meaning that she can really fortress up an area. Then her passive means that an ult accelerant will just give her 100% ult, which means she can use all of that toolkit quite a lot indeed. So as you can see, a very strong counter to the game's current hyper-aggressive meta, which I think is a pretty good thing. Now, from my admittedly very average skill level perspective, she seems to be a lot more impactful to the game than, say, Caustic. And yeah, that does seem, in my view anyway, like a really, really strong addition to the game. Then moving on to other things, Season 2 is also going to add a ranked mode. It's going to have 6 tiers, and you'll get end-of-season rewards based on what tier you got to. And that's, again, fantastic to see. I think it will go a long way to fostering a healthy competitive scene for the game, though it still will need a lot more features for esports and PvP, or just the ranked PvP to take off, like, say, PUBG's really good replay system and just a bunch of things like that. But it's still good to see them making progress. Past that, they said they are beefing up their Battle Pass offering with more skins, and then legendaries that are more as like transformative aesthetically, and the ones they showed off looked quite brilliant indeed. They're also removing some of the lower value categories of items from the Battle Pass, like the trackers, and they're going to be replaced with new categories that will be announced later on. Basically, they acknowledged how their original Battle Pass did not really have great skins and was pretty watered down, so again, that's good to see. Past that, they said the Battle Pass will have daily and weekly challenges that will stack up over time, which will result in faster progression through the tiers, again with them acknowledging that the current Battle Pass was just too darn slow to progress through. And then they ended by teasing some changes to the game map, which is definitely a good thing for them to do. That's something that historically has worked pretty well as a strategy for Fortnite. So overall, I'd say this is exactly what Apex needs. The game launched in a very bare state, it didn't have a ranked queue, and it only had a single play mode. Now, it's not got parity with its competition yet, yet, even with Season 2. Competitors do have other things like timed gameplay modes, such as War Mode, that's in, I think, PUBG and actually most of them. So while Apex somewhat lags behind other games in that regard, the second season will go a very long way to re-engage players, and that's definitely a good thing. Ultimately, people probably played that game, they probably had fun, and then they just got a bit bored. I doubt many people burnt out, and I think that means that with there being good things to return to, that Respawn will probably see a healthy player uptick. Then next we've got Battlefields, where things were pretty darn simple. They just talked us through the next set of maps, and it was essentially just an expanded version of one of the trailers that they released pretty recently. So essentially there are more maps coming over the next few months as a part of Chapter 4 of Tides of War. Well, there's 4 maps there, sort of 4 core maps for that Tides of War, and then they also did some teasing of them remaking the, depending on who you ask, either famous or infamous Operation Metro, which of course was from Battlefield 3. They then ended by teasing the franchise's return to the Pacific Theater, including multiple maps being planned in its autumn season, and that does include Iwo Jima and seemingly a remake of Wake Island, of course, a very famous Battlefield map from the days of 1942 and Battlefield 2, or later on Battlefield 1943. If you were a console player, that's probably where you were first introduced actually to the franchise. So put simply, it's exactly what Battlefield needs, and I say that as a long, pretty much lifelong Battlefield player. The largest problem in this game's life has just been a complete lack of maps, so it's good to see that they're finally getting that going. It seems like Battlefield 5's development was just messy and not smooth, leading to a content drought, but seemingly with DICE LA now chucking away on new maps, it's just going to have a smoother middle section to its life. So that certainly is a good thing, especially because, unlike previously, the maps are all free. You don't need Battlefield Premium for them. That's definitely a lot better, although in my view it seemingly is more of a play into the grander ambitions of the Origin Access Premier subscription, but hey, still, it's the maps being in the base game for free, and I think that's a pretty darn good thing. Past that, sports happened, and The Sims happened. Anthem was mentioned, but it had a comparatively tiny spot in EA's stream. Ben Irving said that they have learned a lot, really, recently, and that they still think the game has the potential to be amazing, but that they have a lot of work to do, and he confirmed that they are working with influencers and players on getting gameplay feedback for the Cataclysm. And that seems reasonable to me. Sure, it's a case of like, oh, the silence is deafening, but I mean, what can we expect there? Like, that's exactly what I would expect, given its gameplay issues, what Ben Irving said. And in my view, what this game needs, it needs a Final Fantasy XIV, A Realm Reborn-like overhaul. A quick scramble of throwing content on the fire would not really help. So if they just arrived here and said, oh, we have made 2 new strongholds, 3 new missions, I'd still be like, yeah, but all of your basic systems are massively flawed. No amount of content can save this. So I'm not saying that I'm going to take, I'm not going to take no news as good news, but I mean, yeah, just the fact that they're not throwing content onto the fire in a big mad rush to save the game maybe makes me think they're taking a bit more time to rethink loot and rethink some of their systems and properly do some just fixing of the foundations, which is what that game needs. And then the final tidbit is that there are 3 new EA originals which were announced. So we've got Lost in Random, which is an action-adventure game, Rust Heart, which is a co-op action RPG, and then an unnamed project from the developer of A Way Out. It seems like a pretty good stack of games, seemingly fitting in with the sort of Netflix original kind of bit of EA's Origin Access business model. I think the idea is that people will come in for the big AAA games for Origin Access, but then they will find less known but still very high quality, say, indie experiences that will give them a continued reason to subscribe. So it seems like that's what's going on. Honestly, it's a pretty reasonable business model, and it's great to see publishers run indie labels like this, ID at Xbox and Squeenix Collective, which are all pretty good. Overall, though, I would say that it was a bit of a ponderous and awkward stream. I think the hosts, they seem to have, snorted up before they went on stage, which was really a little bit jarring and kind of frustrating. I just wish they'd all calmed down a little bit. But still, content-wise, Apex is being handled well. Fallen Order looks like it could be pretty darn good. Like a pretty, not groundbreaking, but a really polished, fun game, if a little safe. Battlefield 5, it's finally moving in a decent direction, and really nothing has changed with Anthem, but I think it would be unreasonable to expect anything major given what we've known about the game's development thus far, and importantly, the scale of change needed to fix up that game. So overall, a pretty decent showing from EA. They probably did benefit in how they framed this, though. If this was a major press conference, people would just be like, oh, there's no new game announcements or anything, how boring. But in doing it like this, it's just updates to their existing games, and they are, for the most part, pretty reasonable updates. Plus, the Star Wars game, yeah, a bit safe, but I'd say probably going to be a pretty decent, sort of 10 to 20-hour experience. At least that's what I'm expecting. So there we go. That's our breakdown of EA's E3 2019 showing. Let me know what you think, and of course, as I said, headbutt that subscription button, because we'll have a lot more content coming out on the channel over the next few days, including the Microsoft stuff, which actually seems pretty darn promising. So stay tuned to that. Thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you next time.